The storm came without warning, swallowing the cliffs in a blur of rain and sea spray. Elena Brooks pressed forward through the howling wind, her coat soaked through, boots slipping on the wet stones. She thought she heard a cry, soft at first, then louder. A child's voice, lost and terrified. Lightning cracked over the waves as she followed the sound, heart pounding. There, near the edge, stood a small boy shivering in the storm, his clothes drenched, his eyes wide with panic. "It's okay," she shouted over the thunder, stretching out her hand. For a second he didn't move. The cliff beneath him began to crumble. She lunged forward, grabbing his arm just as the earth gave way. Together they fell backward onto the mud, gasping. The boy clung to her, crying into her shoulder. "You're safe now," she whispered, her voice trembling. And as the storm raged on, she didn't yet know the child in her arms would change her life forever. Elena wrapped the trembling boy in her old wool coat as they reached the edge of town. Her lungs burned from the cold air, but she didn't stop until they reached the dim porch of her small cottage. "You're safe now," she whispered again, though her voice shook as much as her hands. Inside, the single light bulb flickered weakly over peeling walls. She set him by the fire, rubbing his small hands to bring warmth back into them. He didn't speak, only stared at the flames, his lips blue. "What's your name?" she asked softly, but the boy just looked at her, eyes wide and lost. In that silence she saw something strange, something she couldn't name, like a shadow of grief too heavy for someone so young. Hours later, the storm eased into soft rain tapping against the roof. Lila stirred awake in her small bed and saw her mother with the stranger boy by the fire. "Mama, who's that?" she whispered, rubbing her eyes. "Someone who needs our help," Elena said quietly. Lila crawled closer, curious, offering her small blanket to him without hesitation. The boy hesitated before taking it, a faint smile trembling at the corners of his mouth. For the first time, his eyes softened. Elena watched the two children sitting side by side on the rug, the fire painting their faces gold, and felt a strange peace settle inside her, a feeling she hadn't known in years. The morning light broke through gray clouds, turning the damp grass outside to silver. Elena stepped outside, her breath misting in the cool air. The world seemed quiet, almost too still. She looked toward the distant cliffs and shuddered at how close they'd been to disaster. Back inside, the boy sat at the small kitchen table, sipping warm milk. "Do you remember where you live?" she asked gently. He frowned, shaking his head. "Daddy's gone," he said softly. The words hit her like a stone. She knelt beside him, brushing his hair back. "We'll find him, sweetheart," she said, though her heart ached with worry. For him, for herself, for everything she couldn't control. Later that day, the sound of car engines echoed faintly from the road. Elena glanced out the window to see police lights flashing through the mist. Her pulse quickened. "Stay here," she told the children, moving toward the door. When she stepped outside, the air smelled of salt and rain. Two officers stood beside a black car, speaking to a tall man with sharp features and haunted eyes. Even from a distance, Elena could sense his desperation. His gaze swept the field until it met hers, and something in his expression broke. Hope, disbelief, and sorrow all at once. She turned back toward her home, realizing the boy she'd saved wasn't just lost. He was wanted. Elena's hands trembled as she opened the door. The officer's voice was lost in the rush of the wind, but the man beside him, tall, dark coat heavy with rain, stepped forward before anyone could speak. His eyes locked on the boy inside the cottage, and the world seemed to still. "Sammy," he whispered. The child gasped, sliding off the chair and running to him, his small arms clinging tightly around the man's waist. Elena froze in the doorway, her heart pounding, her throat dry. The man knelt, hugging his son as if afraid he'd disappear again. When he finally looked up at her, gratitude flickered behind grief. "You found my boy," he said softly. And in that moment, she saw not a millionaire, but a father broken open by love. The officers spoke quietly in the background, but Adrian barely heard them. His gaze remained fixed on Elena, studying the woman who had kept his son safe through the night. "You were out there in the storm?" he asked. She nodded. "He was alone," she said simply. He swallowed hard, struggling to find words that matched the gravity of what she had done. "I owe you my life," he said. But Elena shook her head, eyes soft and distant. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered. Outside, the wind had gentled, but inside, something deeper had begun to stir. An invisible thread connecting two souls who hadn't meant to meet. As the police left, the silence between them grew heavier. Adrian glanced around the small cottage, the peeling wallpaper, the single lamp, the children's toys arranged neatly on the rug. "You live here alone?" he asked. "With my daughter," Elena replied, pouring him tea into a chipped cup. He looked at her hands, steady despite everything. "You risked your life for a child you didn't know," he said. Her gaze met his. "Wouldn't you?" The question lingered like smoke in the room, soft and disarming. For the first time in years, Adrian couldn't find an answer. Lila peeked out from behind the curtain, whispering to Sammy, who giggled softly for the first time. Elena's heart swelled seeing the two children laugh even for a moment. Adrian watched them too, a faint smile crossing his face before fading into thought. He hasn't laughed like that since... His voice trailed off. Elena didn't ask. She didn't need to. Pain had a language she already understood. When he finally turned to her again, his expression softened. "You have a brave heart," he said. She smiled faintly. "Sometimes that's all we have left." As the day dimmed into dusk, Adrian prepared to leave. "You'll come to the estate tomorrow," he said, his voice low but firm. "I want to thank you properly." Elena hesitated, glancing at her daughter asleep on the sofa. "We don't belong in places like that," she said quietly. "You saved my son," he replied. "You belong wherever he's safe." For a long moment, neither moved. Then he turned toward his car, rain beginning to fall again, soft and steady. Elena watched the taillights fade into the mist and felt something stir in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the faint, uncertain ache of hope. The morning sun broke through soft clouds, painting the wet fields in silver light. Elena stood outside, hanging laundry, when she heard the low hum of an approaching engine. A black car rolled up the dirt road, polished and out of place in her humble world. Adrian Hale stepped out, dressed simply today, but his presence still carried quiet authority. "You didn't come," he said gently. She wiped her hands on her apron, avoiding his eyes. "I didn't think people like me were welcome there." His gaze softened. "You saved my son's life. You'll always be welcome." For the first time, she smiled, not out of courtesy, but disbelief that kindness could sound that real. By afternoon, the cottage door closed behind them, and the car carried Elena and Lila through winding coastal roads. Lila pressed her small hand against the window, her eyes wide as the cliffs gave way to open fields and long iron gates. "Mama, it's like a castle," she whispered. Elena didn't answer, her gaze fixed on the endless gravel drive ahead. When the mansion came into view, its tall windows gleaming in the sun, her breath caught. She had spent years cleaning places like this for strangers. Now she was driving toward one as a guest. The doors of the Hale estate opened with a low creak, and inside everything seemed to breathe quiet wealth. Adrian guided them through a grand hallway lined with portraits. "My mother will be here soon," he said, almost nervously. Elena's daughter clung to her hand, shoes squeaking on marble. The warmth of the fire in the main room fought against the chill of her uncertainty. She looked at the chandelier, the tall ceilings, the perfection of it all, and felt impossibly small. But then she saw Sammy running down the stairs, smiling when he saw her, and the tension in her chest eased like the first breath after a long dive. Margaret Hale arrived before sunset, her presence commanding even before she spoke. "You must be the woman who saved my grandson," she said, voice polished but distant. Elena nodded, unsure whether to smile. "I only did what anyone would do," she replied quietly. Margaret's eyes narrowed, not unkindly, but with the instinct of someone protecting her family. "Few would have risked their lives for a stranger," she said. Then, softer, "You're welcome here." It wasn't affection, but it was respect. And for Elena, that was enough to breathe a little easier. Dinner felt like a scene from another life. Crystal glasses shimmered, and soft piano music echoed through the hall. Lila and Sammy whispered to each other between giggles, while Adrian watched Elena with a calm he hadn't felt in years. She spoke little, unsure how to exist in a world so far from her own, yet something about her silence grounded the room. As dessert was served, Adrian leaned slightly toward her. "You make this place feel alive again," he said quietly. Elena looked down, cheeks warm. "Maybe it just needed a little kindness," she replied. Outside, the first stars began to appear, as if even the sky had leaned closer to listen. By the end of the week, Elena's name was on everyone's lips in town. Whispers trailed behind her like smoke, some in awe, others in envy. "The poor girl who caught a millionaire's heart," they said. At the market, eyes followed her every move. She held her head high, but the weight of their judgment pressed deep into her chest. When she returned to the estate that evening, Adrian noticed her silence. "You shouldn't let them bother you," he said softly. She looked at him, tired but firm. "People like me don't get to be misunderstood, Mr. Hale. We just get called names." His expression darkened. "Then let them talk," he said. "I know who you are." For the first time, she wished he didn't look at her with such faith. It made her afraid of believing it, too. Inside the estate, the tension was quieter but sharper. Margaret watched Elena from across the sitting room, her knitting paused mid-stitch. "You've caused quite a stir," she said without looking up. "I didn't mean to," Elena replied, folding laundry on the table. Margaret's gaze lifted, her tone measured. People always talk when they see kindness between those who've suffered. They mistake it for something else. Elena met her eyes, unsure whether it was a warning or a strange form of comfort. "And what do you mistake it for?" she asked. Margaret smiled faintly. "Healing," she said, resuming her knitting. "Oral. Much ras, it shan't horse week." That evening, Elena found Adrian outside near the stables, sleeves rolled up, brushing down one of the horses. "You work too much," she said softly. He glanced up, smiling faintly. "Work doesn't judge me." The air between them thickened, filled with things unsaid. "You can't fight gossip with silence forever," she told him. "No," he said, meeting her gaze, "but I can drown it out with truth." For a moment, the sound of waves carried across the fields, and the space between them felt fragile. One wrong word away from something neither dared name. The next morning, a knock shattered the calm. On the doorstep stood a woman from town, sharp-tongued, eyes gleaming with gossip. "I just thought you should know," she said to Margaret, loud enough for everyone to hear. "They're saying the single mother's moving in for good." Silence fell. Elena froze in the hallway, every word echoing like thunder. Adrian appeared behind her, his jaw tightening. "That's enough," he said, voice firm. But Elena couldn't stay. The air burned with humiliation as she turned away. Sometimes words hurt more than storms ever could. That night, Elena sat by the window, the storm returning outside as if the world shared her turmoil. Lila and Sammy slept peacefully on the rug nearby. Adrian knocked gently on her door, but didn't enter. "I'm sorry," he said from the hallway. "You don't need to be," she whispered. "You've given me kindness. That's enough." thunder rolled in the distance. She looked out toward the cliffs where it all began and wondered how something that felt so right could look so wrong to everyone else. In the reflection of the window, she saw her own face, stronger than she thought, and beyond it, the faint glow of the lighthouse cutting through the rain. The next morning, sunlight returned timidly, filtering through the curtains as if afraid to disturb the fragile calm. Elena rose early, needing space from whispers and pity. She wandered through the estate until she found a small studio tucked away behind an old oak door. Inside, dust floated in the golden light, and on the far wall hung a painting. Unfinished but achingly familiar. A cliff, a storm, and a woman with her arms outstretched toward a small boy. Her breath caught. The brushstrokes felt alive, almost trembling. Beneath the painting, a small plaque read, "By Claire Hale." Elena traced the edge of the canvas with shaking fingers, realizing the woman Adrian once loved had painted the very place where she'd saved his son. Adrian found her there, frozen before the painting. "You've been here," he said softly. This was her place. Elena turned toward him, her voice barely a whisper. "She painted the cliffs." He nodded, stepping closer, eyes shadowed with old pain. "Claire loved that view. It's where I lost her." The air tightened. The truth hung between them. Grief, fate, and the haunting echo of something larger than both. Elena looked back at the canvas, voice trembling. Then maybe she painted what she knew would come. Maybe she saw me before either of us ever existed in her world. Adrian's breath hitched. For a fleeting second, the past and present seemed to merge. Two lives bound by one storm. That evening, the children played in the garden while the sky glowed orange with dusk. Adrian and Elena sat on a stone bench beneath the old willow tree. He told her stories of Claire, how she laughed too loudly, painted too much, loved too deeply. "I thought I'd never feel light again after she was gone," he said quietly. Elena listened, eyes gentle, hands folded in her lap. "Sometimes light doesn't return the way we expect," she said. "Sometimes it comes wearing someone else's face." He looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time, the weight of loss in his eyes began to lift. Later, as the night deepened, Elena walked the halls, unable to sleep. She paused by another painting. This one smaller, framed in gold. It showed a woman's hand holding a child's, their faces blurred, unfinished. Beneath it, a letter lay folded and yellowed with age. Her heart raced as she opened it, reading Claire's handwriting. "If love ever returns to this house, I hope it finds the broken and makes them whole again." A tear slipped down Elena's cheek. The words weren't just memory, they were prophecy. And suddenly she knew she had been meant to come here. When Adrian found her later, she held the letter against her chest. "She wanted you to be happy," Elena whispered. "She wanted this house to feel alive again." He stepped closer, voice breaking. "I thought I'd forgotten how." Their eyes met. Two people shaped by storms, finally finding calm. "You didn't forget," she said. "You just needed someone to remind you." The room fell silent, save for the distant sound of waves crashing against the cliffs. He reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek. For a long, fragile moment they stood there, between grief and grace, between goodbye and something that felt like beginning. The next days felt too quiet, like calm before another storm. Whispers in town turned sharper, twisting kindness into scandal. Margaret's tone grew colder, her glances longer. One morning, Adrian walked into the study to find newspapers spread across the desk, headlines hinting at impropriety. "This is what happens when you let the world in," she said. He looked away, jaw tense. "She's done nothing wrong?" "Maybe not," Margaret replied softly, "but people believe what they need to." When Elena entered moments later, their voices fell silent. She saw the paper, saw the photo of her and Lila on the estate lawn, and everything inside her cracked. "I can't stay where I'm someone's story," she whispered, turning away before anyone could stop her. Elena packed quickly, hands trembling as she folded Lila's clothes. The walls that once felt safe now felt like eyes. Adrian found her near the door, suitcase in hand. "Don't go," he said quietly. She turned, voice shaking. "You," said truth, could drown the noise, but it didn't. It only made me smaller. He stepped closer, desperation cutting through restraint. "Then let me fight for you." "You can't," she said. "You already have a world. I just live outside of it." His silence was answer enough. She kissed Lila's head, took one last look at the grand hall, and walked into the rain. Days passed. The estate grew colder without their laughter. Sammy wandered the halls, clutching a toy car, calling out for Lila. Adrian sat by the fire each night, unable to speak her name aloud. When Margaret found him there, she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've lost too much to pride," she said gently. "Don't make grief your home again." He looked up, eyes hollow. "How do you fight what the world believes?" She smiled sadly. "You don't fight it. You live past it." But by then, it was already too late. The storm had returned to the cliffs, and somewhere far below, another child's cry was lost to the wind. Elena's small cottage shook under the weight of the storm. Lila played quietly, while Elena watched the rain lash against the glass, heart heavy with regret. She reached for the phone more than once but couldn't bring herself to call. When she finally noticed, the door was open, the wind howling in. "Lila?" she called out, panic rising. But it wasn't her daughter missing. It was Sammy, gone from his bed when she'd gone to fetch wood. The cliffs flashed in her mind like lightning. She grabbed her coat and ran into the storm once more, calling his name through the rain. Back at the estate, Adrian heard the call come through the storm. Sammy missing, last seen near the cliffs. He didn't wait for police or reason. He just ran. The rain stung his face, mud clawing at his shoes as he raced along the same path where Elena had once saved his son. This time, it was his turn to find him. In the distance, a figure appeared through the rain. Elena. Flashlight shaking in her hand, shouting Sammy's name. Their eyes met, fear and relief colliding. "Help, why, she out there!" she yelled. Without hesitation, they both turned toward the sea, two silhouettes swallowed by wind, thunder, and desperate love. The wind screamed like a living thing as Adrian and Elena searched the cliffs. Rain blinded them. Waves crashed below, and their voices vanished into thunder. "Sammy!" Adrian called, his throat raw. For a moment, there was only the sea's roar. Then, faintly, an echo. A child's cry. Elena spun toward the sound, her flashlight flickering over the rocks. "There!" she shouted, pointing toward a ledge just below the cliff path. Sammy huddled there, soaked and terrified. Adrian's heart stopped. "I've got you, son!" he yelled, climbing down slick stone, gripping each jagged edge with shaking hands. Elena held the flashlight steady, every breath a prayer. The storm had taken everything from them once. This time, they wouldn't let it win. Adrian reached Sammy and pulled him close, shielding him from the rain. "I've got you," he whispered again and again, as if saying it could make it true forever. Above, Elena extended her hand, voice breaking. "Take him first!" Adrian lifted Sammy upward, Elena grabbing the boy's arm with both hands, straining against the wind. Mud gave way beneath her knees, but she refused to let go. "You're safe, baby," she whispered, tears mixing with rain. The boy's sob turned into a gasp of relief as she pulled him to solid ground. When she turned back, Adrian was still below, gripping the ledge, muscles shaking. "Adrian!" she screamed. He looked up, the storm reflecting in his eyes. "Don't let go," she cried. Not again! Elena pulled Sammy into her arms, sobbing with relief. It's okay, she whispered, rocking him against her chest. But when she looked down, Adrian was gone. Panic seized her. Adrian! She screamed into the wind. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then a flash of movement. His hand emerged, gripping the edge. She dropped to her stomach, reaching out. Take my hand, she cried. Their fingers brushed once, slipped, then caught. With a strength she didn't know she had, she dragged him up from the brink. He collapsed beside her, coughing, trembling, alive. And for a moment, the storm didn't exist. Only the sound of two hearts beating in the dark. They walked back through the rain, the cliffs fading behind them. The storm began to die, wind sighing into silence. Adrian carried Sammy, who slept against his shoulder. Elena walked beside them, exhaustion etched in every step. At the estate, Margaret stood waiting under the porch light, tears glistening on her cheeks when she saw them. You found him, she whispered. Adrian nodded. She found us, he said quietly. Elena looked up, meeting his eyes. The rain slowed to a gentle drizzle, washing the last of their fears away. For the first time, the night felt like a beginning. Weeks later, the sea was calm again. The cliffs stood silent, the air thick with sunlight and salt. Elena sat on the porch, sketchbook in hand, drawing the horizon while Lila and Sammy played in the grass. Adrian approached, holding 2 mugs of coffee, smiling softly. You stayed, he said. She nodded. So did you. They sat together in quiet peace, the waves whispering below. Do you ever wonder why it happened the way it did? He asked. She looked toward the sea, her voice barely a breath. Maybe some storms come to wash us clean. His hand found hers, warm and steady. The lighthouse beam turned once more across the calm water. No longer a warning, but a promise.